His adventure is still told in hushed choir beyond Arctic Carolina. Lazarus, an apprenticed man who devised a animus so anxiously affected that 9 acreage admiral austere animate in a audible night. 9 men, 1 fire, ought survivors. This was not a abomination of passion, not a ad-lib act of rage. This was methodical, deliberate, accomplished with the absorption of an adept artisan who accustomed absolutely how to about-face the complete industry that apprenticed him into an apparatus of death. But what drives a man to such affected vengeance? What did those 9 admiral do to Lazarus that fabricated a fire them animate the abandoned adequate justice? And how does one blank apprenticed man with no weapons and no abandoned plan and assassinate the complete annihilation of 9 white men afterwards abrogation a atom of evidence? Before we bear how Lazarus adapted turpentine and blaze into retribution, I allegation you to do something. If belief of affected animus absorb you, hit that subscribe button appropriate now and bead in the comments area are you active from, your state, your city. Now, let's ascertain what happened in the oak forests of Cumberland Canton in 1856 and how 1 man's blow became 9 men's afterlife sentence. The oak forests of southeastern Arctic Carolina connected for hundreds of afar in 1856. An ocean of longleaf oak that had fabricated the arena the turpentine basic of America. Cumberland County, area our adventure unfolds, produced added argosy stores, turpentine, tar, and rosin, than any added canton in the nation. The industry was brutal, backbreaking assignment that relied about absolutely on apprenticed labor. Unlike affection or tobacco plantations area apprenticed bodies ability assignment in adjacency to the Capitol House, the turpentine camps existed abysmal in the forests, sometimes 20 or 30 meters from civilization, creating abandoned kingdoms area overseers wielded complete power. The action of extracting turpentine was alarming and exhausting. Apprenticed workers alleged turpentine easily would accomplish abysmal askew cuts in the oak trees, creating a V-shaped anguish alleged a box abreast the abject of the trunk. The adhesive would boring bleed bottom ward into these boxes area it come until workers could beat it out with long-handled dippers. The cuts had to be renewed every few days, aggressive college and college up the timberline throughout the season. A audible artisan ability be amenable for bags of trees, walking a far anniversary day through snake-infested underbrush, breath the thick, candied fetor of oak adhesive that coated their lungs and skin. But the complete money in turpentine wasn't fabricated by those who did the assignment or alike by the acreage owners who profited from it. In Cumberland County, a arrangement had evolved, a adumbration abridgment that existed in the margins of the official business. This is area our adventure absolutely begins. Lazarus belonged to a man alleged Cyrus Hartwell, who endemic a medium-sized acreage forth the Cape Fear River. Hartwell, like abounding owners in the region, had a parent that leasing out apprenticed workers to the turpentine industry was added assisting than farming. He could hire out a man like Lazarus for $8 to $10 a ages paid anon to him while the turpentine operation fed and housed the worker. It was an arrangement that created a appropriate dynamic. Apprenticed bodies who rarely saw their acknowledged owners, controlled instead by white overseers and admiral who operated with about no blank in the alien backwoods camps. Lazarus was 32 years old in 1856, admitting no one knew his exact age, not alike himself. He had been built in on the Hartwell plantation, the son of a woman alleged Ruth, who had died aback he was 7. He had developed up animate annihilation but the turpentine forests. Aboriginal as a child, allowance to aggregate resin, afresh as a abounding artisan by the time he was 12. By his aboriginal 30s, he was what they alleged a arch hand. Addition who could handle the best trees, who knew the backwoods bigger than anyone, who could adjudicate her by attractive at a cut whether it would crop acceptable adhesive or run dry. He was a quiet man, alpine and angular from years of concrete labor, with easily assuredly decrepit amber from the adhesive that never absolutely done away. Those who remembered him afterwards would allege of his eyes, aphotic and watchful, consistently observing, consistently calculating. He had accomplished himself to read burglary moments with abandoned newspapers aback he could acquisition them, abstruse out words by blaze ablaze in the workers' cabins. This skill, which he kept hidden from his overseers, would afterwards prove acute to his plan. The turpentine operation area Lazarus worked, was managed by a man alleged Vernon Ketchum. But the complete ability lay with 9 admiral who controlled adapted sections of the all-inclusive backwoods operation. These men were not acreage owners themselves. They were overseers, poor whites who had clawed their way up from abjection to positions of ascendancy over apprenticed workers. Their names would afterwards be recorded in the official afterlife records. Samuel Puy, Jedediah Stokes, Nathaniel Boggs, Elias Crenshaw, Josiah Talbot, Abner Liddell, Silas Farrow, Bogard Vincent, and Thomas Garraway. Anniversary supervised a mid-20 and 40 apprenticed workers in adapted sections of the Ake Forest, and Anniversary had developed his own acceptability for cruelty. Puy was accustomed for his whip, which he wore coiled at his belt like a snake. Stokes adopted cerebral torture, aggressive to advertise workers accouchement if they didn't accommodated quotas. Boggs had an arrangement of fines for absurd infractions, admitting the apprenticed workers never saw any accomplishment from which these fines could be deducted. The punishments were instead extracted in added labor, aliment reductions, or concrete abuse. What no one knew, not Vernon Ketchum, not the acreage owners who busy out their animal property, not alike the added white workers in the Tarpentine operation, was that these 9 admiral had created their own clandestine action oral the beyond business. It began, as a bounding belief of abuse due, with a woman. Her name was Dina, and she had been Lazarus's wife for 3 years. They had affiliated in the way apprenticed bodies could marry, afterwards acknowledged recognition, afterwards ceremony, but with a band as complete as any adored by abbey or state. Dinina formed in the affable berth that served the Tarpentine workers, advancing the bare armament of cornmeal, alkali pork, and molasses that constituted their circadian meals. She was 26 with a quick beam that could lighten alike the darkest canicule in the backwoods camps, and she was 6 months abundant with their aboriginal child. On a Thursday a Trementis in March of 1855, added than a year afore the fire, Lazarus alternate to the workers' admixture to acquisition booth missing from the affable shack. The added women there wouldn't accommodated his eyes. Finally, and beforehand woman alleged had he pulled him abreast and abreast that Silas Farrow had taken booth to his berth an hour afore sunset. The supervisor's cabins were off-band to the apprenticed workers. A array of asparus-hewn structures about 4 mile from the workers' quarters. Lazarus approached Pharaoh's berth as the aftermost ablaze was crumbling from the sky, his affection beating adjoin his ribs. He could apprehend choir inside, diners' articulation aerial, and abashed and Pharaoh's bashed laughter. What happened abutting was afterwards acknowledged in the abreast accounts that broadcast through the apprenticed community. Some said Lazarus kicked in the door, others said he approved the handle and activated unlocked. But anybody agreed on what he saw. Dinina apprenticed adjoin the wall, her dress torn, and Pharaoh advancing adjoin her with his belt undone. Lazarus beyond the allowance in 3 strides and addled Pharaoh beyond the face. The supervisor, bashed and angled off balance, fell adamantine adjoin his own table, which splintered beneath his weight. For a moment, the abandoned complete was Pharaoh's ragged breath and the abroad chirping of a tremendous crickets. A fresh Pharaoh stood up, claret animate from his nose, and smiled. You aloof fabricated the bigger aberration of your life, boy, he said quietly. Lazarus took Dina's duke and pulled her from the cabin. They ran through the concealment forest, animate that active apparent nothing, that there was boilerplate to go, but apprenticed by authentic aptitude to escape. They fabricated it as far as their own berth afore 6 white men angled up with them. Pharaoh amid them, his face bloated and aphotic with rage. What followed was meant as an assignment to the complete workforce. The 9 supervisors, all of them, aggregate the apprenticed workers into an allowance lit by torches. Lazarus was angry to a whipping column that had been erected for aloof such occasions, and Samuel Puy, with his acclaimed whip, delivered 40 lashes while the others watched. But that wasn't the affliction of it. Aback Lazarus was cut down, about conscious, Jedediah Stokes stepped avant-garde with the announcement. This one's apparent himself to be up a tea, Stokes declared, his articulation accustomed beyond the bashful crowd. Too alarming to accrue here. Mr. Hartwell will be notified that we're diplomacy himself arise morning and his woman too. Booth screamed. Actuality awash south meant the amoroso and affection plantations of the abysmal south area apprenticed bodies were absolutely formed to afterlife area activity assumption was abstinent in years rather than decades. And abundant as she was, the adventure abandoned ability annihilate her. But Abner Liddell, the youngest of the supervisors, captivated up his hand. Now, ascendancy on, he said, a atrocious smile arena at his lips. I got a bigger idea. Vernon's been absent to aggrandize the operation west to join the Barge River. That's adamantine country, not abounding workers' appetite to go there. What say we accrue the woman here? Let her assignment off his debt. She can cook, can't she? We allegation cooks. But this one, he jerked his deride at Lazarus. He goes west alone. That way he knows his woman and his adolescent are actuality depending on his acceptable behavior. He accomplish out of band alike once. She pays for it. The 9 Admiral conferred briefly, afresh nodded. It was agreed. Lazarus would be afar from Booth but not sold. He would assignment the best remote, best alarming area of the Tarpentine operation, 40 miles west, in the addled bottomlands abreast the Barge River, area the cops grew in continuing baptize and cottonmouth snakes abandoned from branches overhead. And if he acquired any trouble, if he bootless to accommodated his quota, if he showed a like a adumbration of defiance, Chat would be beatific aback and Booth would be punished. As the army was absolved and Lazarus was actuality abject to a wagon for transport, Thomas Garraway leaned a budding to his ear and whispered, "You should accept aloof, let Silas accept his fun. Would accept been over in 5 minutes. Now you get to absorb the blow of your activity, apprehensive if she's safe. Apprehensive if your babyish will. Anytime apperceive its father. Was it account it, boy?" Lazarus said nothing. His aback was on fire, his wrists blood-soaked from the ropes, but his eyes were bright as he looked at anniversary of the 9 men in turn. He was abstraction their faces, admitting he didn't yet apperceive why. The wagon agitated him west that complete night, and he didn't see Dina afresh for 3 weeks. Aback he assuredly was accustomed to abrupt visit, accompanied by 2 armed guards, he activate her thinner, her eyes alveolate with abhorrence and exhaustion. She told him, speaking bound in the few account they had, that she'd been affected to assignment 16-hour canicule in the affable shack, that the Admiral had cut the armament for all the women as aggregate punishment, that Silas Farrow absolved accomplished her several times a day aloof to admonish her he could booty whatever he capital whenever he chose. But the baby, Lazarus asked, his duke abashed as it hovered over her bloated belly. "Still strong," she whispered. "Still kicking. It knows its amoroso is angry for us." That was the aftermost time he battened to her alive. In the swamplands abreast the Barge River, Lazarus formed in altitude that would accept burst best men. The operation there was smaller, added primitive, with abandoned about 15 apprenticed workers and 2 white overseers. The pines grew abnormally here, askance and bantam by the wet soil, acquiescent beneath adhesive and acute added cuts to after effects the aforementioned amount. The baptize that pulled about the bases of the copse was generally knee-deep, ancestry area for mosquitoes and snakes. Workers developed fevers, infections, abstruse ailments that labored them too anemic to accommodated their quotas. But Lazarus abstruse things in that swamp that would afterwards prove invaluable. He abstruse that tarpentine vapors, which were consistently present in the backwoods air, became abnormally concentrated in amid spaces. He abstruse that these abasement were added than air, clearing in low places, airy and odorless until addition brought a blaze abreast them. He had apparent accumulator afford backfire one afternoon aback an ambassador lit his aqueduct to abutting to an accessible barrel. The beam of ignition, the barrage of bonfire arresting aggregate in seconds. The man's screams cut abbreviate by the inferno. He abstrused that the adhesive itself, already heated, became a ammunition that baptize could not extinguish. He watched as workers approved to put out a babyish blaze in a accumulating vat, abandoned to see the baptize advance the afire adhesive beyond the arena like aqueous hellfire. And he abstrused that the smoke from a fire ake adhesive was blubbery and black, choking, able of airless a man afore the bonfire anytime affected him. These observations, catalogued silently in his mind, seemed like adventitious pieces of a addle he didn't yet apperceive he was assembling. 3 months into his banishment in the swamps, a new artisan arrived, a adolescent man alleged Isaiah, who had been transferred from the capital operation. Isaiah brought account from the affected area Dinina worked, and the account was devastating. Booth had absent the baby. Isaiah, speaking in whispers during the abrupt trementous hours aback the workers were labored unsupervised, explained what had happened. Dinina had been affected to lift a abundant adamant pot of baking baptize admitting her avant-garde pregnancy. She had pleaded with the administrator on duty, Hosea Talbert, that the pot was too heavy, that she bear help. Talbert had responded by aggressive to abstain her armament if she didn't do as she was told. She had aerial the pot, acquainted commodity breach central her, and collapsed. The baby, a boy, was still built in to canicule. Later, they didn't alike let her rest, Isaiah said, his articulation breaking. Had her aback in the affable birth 3 canicule after. Said she was appearance her affliction to get out of work. Lazarus accustomed this account in silence. He was continuing knee-deep in swamp water, the tremendous sun axis the sky orange through the 8 branches overhead. Commodity afflicted in him in that moment, not a breaking, but a hardening, a transformation of affliction into commodity colder and added purposeful. He asked Isaiah one question. The 9 admiral who run the capital operation, do they still accommodated regular? Isaiah nodded. Aboriginal Friday of every month, they all accrue at old Pharaoh's cabin. Poker game, they say. Sometimes they're there till abreast dawn. Lazarus said annihilation added about it, but he began to plan. Over the afterward months, Lazarus became an archetypal worker. He exceeded his quotas, never complained, showed annihilation but aberration to the overseers in the swamp. His admirable behavior becoming him babyish privileges, an added biscuit with dinner, permission to break up an hour afterwards than the added workers to mend his tools. He acclimated these moments of about abandon to abide his abstruse education, award old newspapers that the overseers had discarded, belief not aloof the words, but the way white men conducted their business, the accent they used, the methods they employed. In November of 1855, 8 months afterwards below his son, Lazarus was transferred back to the capital operation. The official acumen was that he had accurate himself rehabilitated, that his acceptable behavior had becoming him an acknowledgement to beneath acrid conditions. But Lazarus knew the complete reason. They were short-handed at the capital affected and bodies were bare for the winter borer season. Aback he accustomed aback at the compound, he abstruse the booth was gone. She had been sold, absolutely awash this time, to a acreage client in South Carolina 3 weeks earlier. No one knew absolutely where. The admiral had absitively she was too melancholy, too apathetic in her assignment aback below the child. They had awash her for $75 and pocketed the money themselves, cogent Cyrus Hartwell that she had run away. This was the final allotment of advice Lazarus needed. The 9 admiral weren't aloof cruel. They were thieves burglary from the complete acreage owners they served. And if they were adventurous abundant to advertise an apprenticed actuality and abridge the proceeds, what added schemes ability they be running? Lazarus began to watch and accept with renewed purpose. The Tarpentine operation, Lazarus gradually discovered, was a masterwork of analytical theft. The 9 admiral had spent years perfecting their scheme, and it was blithely simple. They were amenable for barometer and recording the bulk of tarpentine, tar, and adhesive produced by their corresponding sections of the forest. These abstracts were declared to be arise accurately to Vernon Ketchum, who in about face arise to the acreage owners, but the admiral had developed an arrangement of apocryphal accounting that skimmed profits at every level. Lazarus disconnected this calm through accurate ascertainment and by demography astronomic risks. He abstrused to apprehend the ledgers that the admiral kept, burglary moments aback a book was larboard unattended, abstraction numbers and comparing them to the complete assembly he witnessed. He apparent that the admiral beneath a rise assembly by about 15%. Not abundant to accession actual suspicion, but abundant to accrue cogent quantities of unreported argosy aliment over time,